Snow fell as if the sky were sifting ashes, soft and steady, veiling the rough stone and black timbers of Castle Black in a slow and soundless burial. The wall loomed beyond like a frozen cliff, its face the color of stormlight, and every breath broke white on the air. Jon Snow stood with his gloved hands flat on the great map of the haunted forest, its creases and ink stains like the scars of an old wound. A brazier hissed nearby, coals snarling now and again when a fleck of snow found them through the shutter seams. Ghost slept beneath the table, his fur the same white as the drifts, a faint rumble in his chest that might have been a dream or a warning. Outside came the scrape thump of shovels and the crack of axes, the grumble of men and the slow thud of the giant's tread. One liked to walk the yard at night when the snow was clean and new, as if he loved to be the first to write on it with his broad, monstrous feet. Jon listened a while, the sounds grounding him in the work of surviving another day, and another after that. The ravens muttered in their rookery, an old wood and iron smell, the language of hunger and cold. Somewhere, Dolorous Ed was likely telling the snow to stop snowing, if it pleased the snow, and that it was all very well for flakes to be white, but did they have to be so many of them? He lifted his eyes to the seam of light beneath the shutters. Dawn was a gray rumor only. The day would be long. They were all long now. "You've been staring at the forest for an hour," Tormund Giants, Bane announced when he shouldered through the door, heat and rhyme and laughter with him. Frost had beard-laced his whiskers, and 2 snowflakes clung like ornaments in his hair, stubborn as his own pride. "If staring brought wood, we'd never freeze, Lord Crow." Jon turned. "I was thinking how to keep the wood we have." "Shut the Queen's men out of the stores," Tormund said. "That'd do it. I need them too." Jon lifted his hand off the map and gestured at the stool. Tormund ignored it and squatted like a bear. The big wildling's eyes found Ghost and softened. He took the wolf's ear between 2 fingers as careful as a nursemaid and rubbed it. Ghost's tail thumped once. "You asked for me," Tormund said, "and here I am. Gods help me." Jon nodded. "The rangers are too few. The woods swallow men and give back bones and blue eyes. I need scouts, many of them, not just to look but to ride hard to outrun what follows, to bring word to hamlet and hall, to herd the free folk who come in to safety. We lost too many men on the fist and after. Too many good eyes." Tormund's mouth crooked. "I lost a good set of red hair too." Jon felt the old wordless ache twist under his ribs and said nothing. "I know your thought," Tormund went on. "You want women. I want spearwives," Jon said, half smiling. "And northern girls. Those who ride garrons as if born astride one. Those who can follow a stoat through a whiteout and never lose it. They go where men do not look for them. Men guard against men." Tormund grinned, all yellow teeth. "You want my women, and you want the Norths, and you want to put them in leathers and furs and teach them the crow ways. You want them to listen to you." "I want them to live," Jon said, too sharply. "And I want the people south of the wall to live. We're blind past the first line of trees. We cannot be blind." Tormund rocked back on his heels. Outside, a horn called one long, fat note for the changing of the watch, and the yard's murmurs pealed and softened with it. "Spears in a man's hand, spear in a woman's hand," Tormund said. "Makes no matter when the dead come walking. Some of mine will join, some will not. But there are those who were always meant to range. I can find them for you. And you say northern girls? The bears fight, the mountain women fight. Some of the Skagos wolves too, I hear. Tough bitches, all. Is there any other kind?" Jon said before he could stop himself. Tormund barked a laugh. "Ah, careful or Val will hear and cuff your ear." Jon looked again at the map. He had laid out dragonglass arrowheads on Lys men's charts before. They looked like small shards of night. "I've men who can teach them," he said. "Silence, signals, the meaning of snow, napping black glass, Garen work, the headlong run and the quick stop, how to cut wind from a horse's nose, how to read the trees by the lines where the frost stands and where it melts. You talk like a crow who was born not crying but counting tally in the air. Tormund's good humor had a gravity beneath it. "There'll be some among yours who don't want it." "Bowen Marsh will tut," Jon said. "But he tuts at everything. He'll say the Watch is no place for women. He is not wrong. They would not be of the Watch. They would be ours. Allies. Friend to the men who look north and south both." Tormund scratched at his belly through his furs. "Bowen Marshall tut himself into stabs. You keep on like you kept on." He wrapped his arms around his knees. "I like this thought. I like it very well. I could put it in my pocket and keep it warm all winter. We make them riders and we set them out. Quick as weasel shit in a man's boot." Jon nodded once. "Find them, then." "I'll begin in the shield hall," Tormund said, then lifted his big head, nostrils flaring. "And look there, Lord Crow. You have a shadow in your hall and she smells of cinnamon." The door opened before Jon could answer, and the room seemed to warm. Meltwater sobbed in the gaps between the logs of the fire, as if in answer to the woman who came gliding in red as a wound in the snow. Melisandre of Ashai smiled when the heat met her and held her palms out, a finger's width over the brazier, as if fire were a thing to be coaxed like a cat. "You sent for me?" Jon asked. "I saw something," Melisandre said, and her voice held that soft iron that bent men with the sense of being caressed while they were being compelled. She looked at the map and then at his eyes. "A line of riders on white horses," she said, their faces masked in furs. Snow clung to them like a second skin. The wind tried to push them backward and could not. In their hands, spears dripping black tears. She glanced at Tormund and smiled. "And a white wolf running before them." Tormund's laugh was a little quieter this time. "Your fires see much these days, woman." "They see enough," Melisandre said. "Lord Snow, you have been restless. The night felt your unrest and gave me its whisper." "I have work," Jon said. "You will give others work," Melisandre said. "The girls will wake before the men. It is the way of this world. And there is a blue light walking, Lord Snow. Do not mistake it for a star. When it comes, it eats breath." Her talk of seeing always set his teeth. He felt like a man who stands too near a cliff with snow underfoot, all his weight on the hilt of a knife. "Whatever light walks toward us, I need eyes on the forest. More than I have." Melisandre's lips curved. "Then make them." When she left, Tormund spat into the brazier and the spit hissed like a little serpent. "I like her for the heat and the way she makes your words travel inside your head and lose their way," he said. "But I do not like what walks in her shadow." "I like the heat," Jon said wearily. "Everything else I'll live with, if I can." "You will," Tormund said. "Or not, but that's a thought for tomorrow. Today we go to the shield hall and make your notion bark teeth." They did. Word went through the ways of Castle Black like smoke through a cracked wall. Lord Snow calls for spearwives and girls who ride. Queen's Crown wind came rattling down between towers and under the plankways, flicking banners against their poles. They gathered in the shield hall, the smoky room where men shouted when there was meat and oaths when there was honor, and where the free folk came to be counted and given bread. The tang of old ale and spear oil filled the air. The captured shields of men long dead and houses shattered looked down like tired faces. Torches guttered. Men stood, boots powder white, and women came after, all the angles of them dulled by fur and leather. They smelled of snow and long road. Jon stood on the dais with Tormund and spoke like a man counting coin in his hand. "I will not take you into the Watch," he said. "Our vows are not yours. You will be free folk still if you are free folk, and North if you are North. But I will teach you, and you will serve the realm with what you learn. You will ride when others sleep. You will watch when others feast. You will run before us and behind us, and you will not be thanked, oftentimes. If you join, you will not be asked to bear children or to wed while you serve. Your horses will be Garans who know wind better than oats. You will carry the black glass. You will kill the dead. And you will be paid food, shelter, leather, and steel. I will not promise you songs. What you earn will be cold and the knowledge you did it." There was a susurration at that, and a few laughs like stones knocked together. A Mormont woman stood at the front. a square-shouldered girl with hair braided back like rope and eyes the color of peat. "I'm Brinna," she said, not glancing at the men around her. The bear badge on her gorget had been mended twice, battered flat and hammered up again. Bear Island has no need of songs. The bears sing when there's meat. I'll take your training, Lord Snow, if it puts me where I'm needed when I'm needed. A thing I like to hear, Tormund said, chin jutting. And you? He pointed with a big meat hook of a finger at a woman with hair the color of honey licked thin by winter sun. Her cheeks were scarred, white lines like an old hunter's map. "Runa Thistlehair," she said. "I carved a woman's name on my spear when I took it. My spear's called Weather. Men told me I couldn't take it that day, but I did. I'll ride for you, Crow. If you teach me to kill what doesn't breathe true." A girl next to her half hid her face in a fur collar. "Skaya Norei," she murmured, voice like a flake of ice melting on the tongue. "My father says our clan was a wind before your houses grew. I can smell a man in trees if he broke a branch wrong. My Garen knows my song." "Erna Little," said another, broad and stony calm. "I've run the teeth of the mountains and come down with goat's blood and no breath left. If the blue-eyed ones have weight on the snow, I'll hear it." Other names came: Halla, Sigrid, Nella of the Skags, a flax-haired Karstark's cousin who would not say which cousin she had. There were spearwives with catskin hats and girls from the gift whose hands were raw from taking in cattle for fleeing families. One was scarcely more than 12 and Jon shook his head. He would not take her, and the way her mouth tightened told him she would remember and come back older. To each who entered the circle they set with chalk on the floor, he gave a word and a task to perform with eyes shut. Walk to the torch. Turn thrice and point where you came from. Name what you last ate. Lift the left foot of the woman next to you, listening for the ones who heard their world with more senses than sight. Bowen Marsh stood in the back with his heavy jowls and damp eyes and did not speak. The Queen's men sneered in their red and gold and whispered words like sin and shame. Jon watched them without turning his head. Later, he thought, "I will take their measure and they will take mine again, and all our patience will be forced to stand like a blade on a whetstone and not wobble." They set about the work. The yard rang with a new rhythm, more feet, smaller steps, quicker perhaps. Garens were led down from the stables, shaggy and sure-footed beasts with manes like frozen reeds and eyes that seemed to watch the wind. The farriers banged their nails and the smell of hot iron and hair filled the air. In the old smithy the black glass came out of the casks that had come with the king's ships from Dragonstone, chunks of night with a sheen like oil on water. Silent, careful hands napped them into arrowheads that would cut and could not be honed, that broke like spun sugar and left edges that slice without warning. They taught the women to nap. The hall filled with the soft tap-tap-tap of bone tools, the breath holding quiet when a flake came away cleanly and laid a perfect line. Cheers like whispers. In the practice yard, Jon watched Brinna Mormont loose shafts at a straw man hung with rawhide, her bow a scrape mended barebone thing. She shot with shoulders square and chin down, breath slow. The first arrow struck the throat where the windpipe would be if a man had one, and the second took the eye, and the third took the eye where there was none. "Good," Jon said. Brinna looked aside at him and nodded once like a soldier. Runa Thistlehair wrestled with a girl whose name Jon had not learned, both of them panting steam while Tormund shouted things about hips and feet and leverage that made the Queen's men redden to the ears. When Runa threw the girl, she did it with a flick of the leg that would have broken a knee if she had meant it. "The dead don't care if you fight fair," she said to the girl, and then helped her up and laughed. Erna Little climbed the wall's lower ice with picks in her hands as if she had grown there. Skaya stood at the edge of the yard with her eyes half closed, turned her head this way and that, and then went to a stack of barrels and pulled a rat out by its tail as if she'd been led by a string. Jon showed them how to break camp without leaving stories in the snow. He showed them how a hearth smoke will cling and then vanish if one sets it right, and how to drift a horse through a curtain of birches and come out without a snow flurry. He showed them how to use the horn and not to use it, and how to shape a low whistle so that it sounded like wind. He had them pull a sledge with a man wrapped tight as a child on it, and then trade places and learn how a sledge runs differently when the man inside is dead. He told them the old signal for 3, 2 quick and 1 long, and told them never to blow it unless the night itself had fallen on your shoulder like a hand. He showed them the trick of walking and then stepping high and planting feet heel first like a fox. There were accidents. There are always accidents. A girl from Oakenshade put her thumb through a glass flake and cut to bone. She did not sob until she saw the white of it, and then Jon put her hand in snow and told her to bite leather and was proud when she did. Sigrid fell beneath a garron in a drift and would have broken her ribs if Brenna had not gripped the lead and pulled the beast aside with a curse that could have curdled milk. The farriers argued. Hunters laughed in ways meant to be kind and not kind both. Men of the watch did not know whether to look away or stare, and so did both, and then did their work. Bowen Marsh came to Jon in the afternoon of the third day, when the air was too still for the snow to hide beneath and each flake hung in the air like a thing deciding whether to fall. He came with his paperwork in hand like a priest's book and his disapproval wrapped around him like a cloak. "My lord," he said, "this is not our way." "It is now," Jon said, not looking from where Skya was loosing an arrow into a mound of straw at 20 paces. She missed the first, hit the second, and the third struck with a thunk. "We are the Night's Watch," Bowen said. "We serve no king, no daughter, no wife. There have never been women in our ranks." "They are not in our ranks," Jon said calmly. "They are not in our bed either. They are in the snow where our eyes need to be. They will not take our vows. They will not live in our barracks. They are our allies. They will eat our bread because they will earn it by saving the lives of our men. And the lives of the realm's men and women and children besides." Bowen's eyes grew moister. The cold did that to him. It made him look perpetually on the verge of tears. "There will be talk. There is always talk," Jon said. Ghost lifted his head then and a low, soft growl ran out of him, a note like the steam sighing from the brazier. Jon laid a hand on the direwolf's back without thinking. "Bowen," he said, quieter, "do you think this is a game I play to gall you? Do you think I ask for this because I want it? I ask because winter does not care what you or I want. I ask because dead men move in the forest and they do not tire and they do not parley. I ask because we have seen them. You have not. Believe me, if you ever do, you will not wonder why I wanted women to ride." Bowen swallowed. "The Queen will object." "The Queen may object," Jon said. "She will not decide." Bowen stood there a moment, the papers in his hands going soft with melting snow before he clutched them tighter, as if he heard them pleading quietly for mercy. "As you will, my lord," he said, and walked away rigid as a board. They went out for the first time the next morning. The women wore cowls and hoods and had their bows in their hands, long knives on their belts, the black glass arrowheads tucked into quivers that had once held goose-feathered shafts meant for men. Garrons snorted plumes in the air. Tormund named them with big, foolish names before they left. Ghost's eyes, he called them at last, and while Jon would have picked something less like a song and more like a tool, the name pleased the women and they laughed. The name hung in the air like a promise. "Ghost's eyes," Brenna said afterward, her mouth turning wry. "If we fail, it will be a cruel name to whisper." "If you fail," Runa said, swinging into her saddle, "you won't be there to hear it." They took the east gate and slid out into the trees, the world turning from walls and smoke to a quiet that was not quite silence, only a softness full of its own speech. Snow lay thick, on bough and branch, and underfoot the drifts were crusted crisp and treacherous where the wind had run them. The sky hung close to the earth and the clouds were a belly of low gray. Jon rode with them for the first mile and then turned aside. "We'll meet at the old creek," he said. "Signal if you must. No heroics. You are eyes, not teeth." He watched them go until the white and gray of them became part of the great white and gray of it all, and it was difficult to say where they ended and the land began. He rode alone for a little while, Ghost ranging ahead, the wolf's footfalls as silent as falling ash. South, the gift lay slumbering under its blanket, peasant roofs sagging with weight. He could imagine smoke rising in steady, fragile threads from the little hole in a poor roof. North, the haunted forest kept its own counsel. He kept thinking of a girl laughing and the taste of snow melting on her mouth, and the thought made him set his jaw. They found a hamlet half a day's ride east, for houses built low and tucked against a copse. a smokehouse with a roof that had fallen in, a well with a broken windlass. There were tracks all around: fox, hare, weasel. Man. The man's prints were a week old, perhaps more. The cold can hold stories a long time. There was no smell of smoke. A door stood open and snow had piled in, untroubled by footprints. Jon dismounted, pushed the door with his shoulder. It creaked as if reluctant after holding its tongue so long. Inside the room was neat and nothing was right. A table stood with 3 bowls on it, all with a crust of something white and solid, as if porridge had congealed and become a winter of its own. A wooden horse lay on its side beneath a chair. He picked it up and set it on the table. Sometimes this had happened before. He felt the air in a room stretch, thin as a skin of ice over a puddle, and then quiver. Ghost walked in and sneezed. He heard the whistle, 2 short, 1 long. The hair along his arms lifted. He went out fast, bow unshouldered by the time he cleared the threshold. In the trees to the north, the world had shifted subtly. It was colder there, and the color had been, no, not bleached, but made so clean that it hurt his eyes to look. Runa came riding hard, Skaya beside her, Erna behind. Brinna rode last with something long and ugly across her saddle and her mouth a straight red line. They checked their horses and the Garen's hooves scissored snow. It was a child, Skaya said in a voice like a boy whose voice is broken and is trying to learn itself again. Runa slid down and hauled the thing from Brinna's saddle and dropped it. Thumped like a log and kicked once and then was still. It had once been a boy, perhaps 6, and had been a week in the snow. The eyes burned blue. Jon put an arrow through one. Glass hit glass. The blue shut like a squinted eye in sun, and opened again. More, Erna said, practical. We did not light a fire, but my hands itch with it. Jon nodded. They put 4 more glass shafts into the boy and then, when the eyes still tried to open, they chopped the head off and salted it and wrapped it in a skin. We burn the rest, Jon said. The head we take back to show the Queen's men what it is we are about. They burned the boy in a ring of stones, and the smell was sweet and stomach-turning and stretched thin by winter to a memory of a smell instead of a smell. Runa stood staring, her mouth a hard line, then spat. It was the wolves brought us to him, she said. A scattering of prints, more than one. But they ran away when we came. I don't like that. Nor I, Jon said. On the way back, Erna pointed with her chin. A crow humped in a birch tree, feathers puffed, eyes black. A raven wheeled above and cried names. The snow sighed behind them and they turned and saw nothing. I smell iron, Skaya said, puzzled, then shook her head. No, not iron. Winter's 3 days from now. That's what it smells like. They made it back by dusk. The Queen's men gathered when they saw what they carried, and the shaking and the breathing and the whispering grew like wind around a house. Melisandre watched with eyes that looked warm and were not. The dead, Jon said clearly, the head dropping to thump in the snow. This is what moves in the trees. This is what they wake to do their work. We burn them if we find them and they do not rise. Glass stops what frost starts. If you want to live, act like it. He sent the head to be burned and the godless smell curled the yard. The women stood ringed by men's faces and did not shrink. Brinna's jaw shook once and set. Jon saw it and said nothing. Erna took the bridle of her Garen and rested her forehead against the shaggy brow with an intimacy like prayer. Runa crossed her arms and looked at the others and dared them to look back. Skaya slid her eyes closed and opened them again, and the world seemed to brighten a hair. In those days after, the ghost's eyes went out and returned and went out again, and Jon began to feel the shape of their work not as an idea in his head but as a rhythm in his blood. They traced paths around villages and wrote secrets in the margin of maps. They learned where the creek ice ran thickest and where it thinly sang of drowning. They taught their Garens to lie in a drift and not snort. They watched the tree lines like men watch the sea. They learned how to tell if the snow fell in the last hour by the way it lay on the twig of a hawthorn, a trick that made Runa close one eye to measure and then spit into the snow to be sure. There were rescues, a family of 3 from Dalin's holdfast, the mother frostbitten over half the cheek, her little boy clutching a bundle of iron nails and a comb like a knight bearing his banner. the father coughing strings of blood into a rag. Brenna found them and lashed their sledge to her saddle, and did not tell the boy when he asked if the nails would help that they would not. She only took them from him and put the with the dragonglass arrowheads in her bag, and told him they would. Runa fetched a midwife by riding like a madwoman at midnight and brought 2 girls into the world in a shed with a stew pot still warm. Erna went up a slope and vanished so completely that Jon thought her gone, and then she came down again with her cheeks whipped red by cold, with word of men moving south with dogs and heavy armor. Bolton men, by the look of their banners, though the wind had worried the colors to tatters and snow masked that too. Bolton, Tormund said when the word came to him. He was gnawing marrow from a bone, as if he could draw strength from another creature's body and hoard it. Aye, that one threw me from his hall when I was young enough to laugh at men and old enough to break their teeth. The flayed ones love to ride where there's no flesh to flay. He flays with words now, Jon said. He had a letter on his table, letters like knives in a skin. The bastard writes like a man carving with a dull blade, the strokes long and ragged, each crossing another. He had not answered it yet. He still had to hold the wall in his hands like a bowl. He could not let the water slosh. We keep our eyes on them, and we do not ride or shoot unless we must. If the Boltons come into the gift pursuing men who do not belong to them, we stop them. But we do not start something we cannot finish. That's a good thought, Tormund said. Let's see if the world listens when you speak it. Queen Celis issued pronouncements, the words made brittle by the cold. She did not like the riders. She said so with her mouth turned as if she had bitten a lemon and could not spit for fear of offending the lemon. She was not queen of this place, and the crows did not answer to her, yet she had set her people here with their bright cloth and their strange gods. She demanded an accounting of who rode and who did not and what their fathers called themselves. Jon sent her not quite what she asked. He sent her the dead boy's head wrapped in a leather bag and a note. This is why we ride. When she read it, or had it read, she sent a command that the remains be burned with the rite of R'hllor, and he replied that the snow didn't know the names of gods. Melisandre came to him that night again, soft and sure-footed, the smell of spiced wine walking a pace ahead of her like a careful servant. You have brought heat to this place, she said. Heat creates a wind. Winds raise storms. There would be storms if I did nothing, Jon said. Ghost was awake and looking at her with eyes the color of blood on snow. If you see danger, tell me of the path around it. There is no path around, Melisandre said. Only through. She paused, and it seemed to him that she was listening to something he could not hear, not even with Ghost's ear. There is a blue light, I said. It has taken a horse's shape now in the flames.
Apale mare.
It runs with no rider. It runs and runs. The girls should be careful of thin places. Things can fall through. There are no gods in thin places, Jon said. There are only gods in thin places, Melisandre said with a curious softness. Look to the queen's crown. He looked. He sent the ghost's eyes to the old watchtower where once king's men had watched the green line of the forest like a breath. It squatted on an island in a tarn with a causeway to it like a stitch on a wound. Once he had hid there with a girl and stolen time, and he sent Runa instead of Brenna because he could not trust himself to think of the place and not of the sound of rain on old stones and the taste of salt. Runa came back with snow in her hair and a fury slashed across her face. Bolton men, she said. They rode to the causeway and did not cross it because I set a little fire on the tower for them to see, and the wind took it and threw it in their faces and then took it back again. They saw ghosts, I think. But they had 4 men with sacks that moved like sacks with men inside them move. It is an odd thing to learn how men move when they can't move. The sacks had holes. A woman's hair in one. A man's cry in another. I put 2 arrows into the back of the last horse and he went down and the man went down. The other 3 rode on. I couldn't catch them without the noise taking others to me. Jon closed his eyes for a breath and opened them again, and the world was still there. We ride, he said. Not many. We do it clean. No banners. We take them if we can. We bring them back. Ah, Tormund said, and clapped him on the shoulder so hard Jon's teeth clicked. There's the crow I know, the one who wants trouble to look him in the eyes. It was done like all rash things are done, with care that seems like caution and courage that feels like foolishness. Brinna, Runa, Erna, and Skaya went, and 8 men of the watch who had made fewer mistakes than others and had learned from more. They went at night, where night is a thing and not only an absence. The snow was older now, and the wind had been at it, shaving it thin in places and piling it in others, a landscape that constantly lied about itself. They spread and went low and tied flapper branches to their garrons' tails to erase their own words as they wrote them. Erna found the path the Boltons had taken by the way the snow shallowly rose and fell beneath drifts where the horse's breath had melted and then set. A trick she taught Runa and then wished she had not when she saw the wildling's eyes. They caught up at dawn when the east had the color of old bone and the sky could not decide between night and day, and so was both. The Bolton men were making their horses walk slow to keep the sacks from swinging. The sacks themselves were loud, not with shouts but with the rustle of bodies that had not been allowed to make sound. The men wore the flayed man on their chests, one with an arm-binding red cloth at the bicep. Later it would become important that Jon remembered it. "Take the last 2, Jon sighed. Make the other 2 flee. We do not want battle. We want them to decide they are cowards and live long enough to be cowards again another day." "Ready." Brinna put a glass arrow to string. She thought briefly of the morning on Bear Island when the sea ice had cracked and her mother had thrown a rope and she had gripped it and learned that strength is not in the hands but in the hips and shoulders. She let the arrow go. It went into the knee of a horse and the horse screamed. Jon's second shaft took the other in the hamstring. And then the world turned much too fast with snow and men and breath. Runa slid through it like a thread through cloth and cut a sack open, and a woman spilled out like grain. And Erna pulled her into the trees and pressed her mouth shut to keep her from sobbing a warning, and Skaya slit the rope that held the sack tight and told the man who fell out that he would bite his own tongue in half if he cried now. And he gripped it with his teeth like a bit, and tears ran down and froze. The other 2 Bolton men turned and saw nothing but snow, and an arrow flashed and struck one in the face, and he screamed without the words to go with it, and then wheeled his horse and fled. The last man kicked his mount to follow him, then turned again and looked backward and saw the woman struggling to stand, and the flayed man on his chest seemed to wrinkle and laugh. Runa saw his eyes and made the decision he would have made if their places had been reversed. She rode him down, and as his horse stumbled she leapt from her saddle and the 2 of them hit the snow. She drove her knife through his throat and then cut side to side fast and hard, and the blood came hot and red and black at the edges and spilled to steam. He gurgled and clawed at her, and the smell of blood filled her mouth, and she snarled like something that had never had a name. "Enough," Jon said softly, and pulled her back. Her breath huffed like a beast. They brought 2 sacks home empty and 2 with living people inside. 2 men, one a farm boy, one a small-hold man with a scar down his cheek, both half frozen but alive. The others thanked them with a desperation that was not pretty. The farm boy saw Jon's sword on his back and tried to kiss his gloved hand, and Jon threw his hand up as if to ward off a spear. Back at the wall there was anger and the kind of empty silence that roars. The Queen's men said this was a kidnapping of the king's vassals. Jon told them it was a rescue of free men stolen in the night. Bowen said nothing that day. That night, there was a quarrel in the yard, and a knight with a blue star on his cloak strode into the giant's path with his fine sword out and shouted words about honor that were made foolish by the way the cold turned his breath into a ghost. One reached for him as one might reach to pluck a turnip from a garden. Melisandre called out something in a language without S's, and the sound of it made Jon's belly twist. But the knight came on and jabbed the steel into the giant's wrist, and the giant roared and took him up and dashed him down, and when he did it the bones broke loud as branches under ice. The yard went dead silent, and then broke into the kind of sound people make when they think the world might be ending nearby. Jon put out fires all day. He put out fires with words and with the flat of his hand, and by standing so close to men that they had to look him in the eyes and remember themselves. He took one to the old storage cavern and sat with him while the giant wept with a sound like wind through teeth. He sent Melisandre away when she began to sing. He kept men's blades out of each other's ribs. At the end of it he went back to his room and took his sword ghost's teeth, as he sometimes called it in his head when he felt strange, and he laid it down and said nothing for a very long time. After that came the letter. They called it pink for the wax and for the color the words made in the mind when you read them. The bastard wrote with a hand like a flayed man's smile. Crooked, sly, a little gape that showed white where red should be. He named names he should not know. He asked for things he was a child to ask for, like toy swords, and threatened like a man who doesn't know where his fear ends and others begin. He said he had killed Stannis dead in the snow. Jon read it and felt heat running through the cold of him like a thin vein of iron under frost. He told himself to breathe and did it. "I will ride," he said to the men of the watch and the free folk gathered in the shield hall. "I will take men south and cut this bastard down to size." The hall's echo picked up the words and made them sound like plans. People rose to their feet and shouted. Tormund laughed so loud one of the ravens cried back. Bowen Marsh stood and opened his mouth and closed it again. He would have ridden. How could he not? The bastard had named Ghost. He had named Val. He had named the king. There is a place in a man where, if you strike it, you make him forget he is a man and remember something older. Jon had had that place struck too many times. He called for men to ready the horses and for volunteers, and he put on his sword belt and felt like he had been born wearing it. He moved through the yard like a man moving through a dream that had been waiting for him for years. The ghost's eyes were not in the yard. They were north, riding the edges of the old king's roads through the trees, watching the white for movement that was too steady, too smooth, wrong. Brenna rode with Skya and Erna that day, and Runa rode with a young girl from the gift, whom Jon had finally allowed to come after she had showed him her scarred hands and said, "I have more life in these fingers than some men." They found tracks that moved in circles and then went straight as lines and then stopped. They found a place where the wind sang under the snow like a mouth playing a flute. They found a patch of trees where the dead sat with their backs to the trunks as if waiting for a story, and when they drew near the dead, opened their eyes and crawled toward them with fingers that dug like claws. The women rode hard, fired, killed and burned, were sick afterward quietly and without drama, and moved on. When they came back, they saw the yard bristling with men and the pavements slick with trodden snow. They saw Jon in the center of it, men crowding him and others coming to him with faces that had been their faces once and were now stretched wrong across their bones. They saw blades in hands and the men holding them not knowing they were holding them. Brenna was the one who understood first. "There," she said, and pointed, her voice clipped. Nella was next to her, and her mouth went small like a needle hole. Bowen Marsh had his eyes on Jon and his hand on a knife, and the Queen's men hissed to each other like men watching a cockfight. Edison Tollett stood with hands lifted helplessly, as if he would catch falling snowflakes and return them to the sky. Skya put 2 fingers between her teeth and whistled 3 notes, soft, soft, long, and the world seemed to pause because it had to listen if only to know what not to do. Runa was already moving. Erna had her knife in her hand and then put it away because she needed both hands to push people aside who were too shocked yet to move themselves. The girls made a wedge with their shoulders and walked into the press as if they were moving through a thicket and not men, and it parted with curse and cry. Jon heard the whistle and pivoted. His eyes picked faces out of the room as if he were choosing fruit. He saw Brenna. He saw Bowen's eyes. He saw the knife. He did not see the man behind him because men do not see behind except when they have a wolf for that. Ghost came off the steps like snow falling from a roof and hit the man, and the knife went sideways. It went sideways into Jon's side, low, a kiss of iron, and then the hot fog of blood that blooms fast and cold. He felt it as a punch and then as a pain and then not at all, as his body forgot to know itself for a moment. The man with the knife had a face like wet bread when Ghost's teeth closed on his wrist, and a second knife came from somewhere else and struck Jon again. And then there was Runa's breath at his ear saying something obscene to keep him awake, and Brenna's hands on him like iron, and Ernest's knee at his hip pinning him as a third blade moved through the air and missed by nothing, and then somebody screamed. The yard became the inside of a storm. Swords sparked. Men shouted. The Ghost's eyes fought not like men who begin arguments or settle them with blood, but like women who put out fires in kitchens and houses where the wind lives, and who knew what to grab and what to let fall and when to kick a stool. Brenna punched a man in the throat and took his air. Runa drove her knife into the wood of the post next to a man's ear, and the man froze because he thought for a moment his ear was gone. Erna took a knight's knee from behind and knocked him to the ground, where he lay laughing with the shock of it and could not get up. Skya stood with her back to Jon and blew a thin, steady sound through 2 fingers, a sound like wind under ice, not the call for others but a call men do not recognize and therefore cannot answer. When it ended because men were tired and because Melisandre was standing on the stairs with both hands uplifted, and flames burned behind her like curtains. She had not set them. That would have been too much like what she liked to do, and Jon had told her not here. But they burned anyway, because sometimes the air must give in to the temptation of spectacle. Bowen Marsh had dropped his knife somewhere and was crying with no tears because the cold had taken them, and the knife in Jon's side had kept its promise and opened him enough that blood ran. Ghost stood over him like a pale storm, chest heaving, muzzle red, and every time a man took a step toward Jon the wolf's eyes moved and the man took the step back again without thinking about it. Jon was not dead. He was not wholly with the world either. He drifted on the edge of a thin place and found no gods there, only a voice saying, "You are not done." He could not tell if it was his or someone else's. He drifted into it like a man into sleep. The ghost's eyes carried him. They carried him like wood, not like a man, because wood does not break if one holds it hard enough. They took him to his room and laid him down, and Skya stood outside the door and made the old wind whistle, and men heard it and looked at her and did not understand what they had heard and did not care as long as it kept them from doing something foolish. Melisandre came and knelt and sang. Val came, her white fur hood thrown back, and took Jon's hand and held it in both of hers and closed her eyes and did something a wildling woman does with a man's hand to make his spirit follow the breath in his chest instead of the blood leaking from it. The queen's men were thrown out. Tormund stood at the door with his hands crossed and shook every time someone tried to push past him, which had the effect of making the someone reconsider because Tormund's shaking made the corridor shake as if from a passing herd. When Jon woke, the world was very quiet. He had not gone far then. He heard Ghost breathe and counted the breaths, like counting coin. He felt pain like a lineage, all the sons and fathers of it. Some hurts were old and familiar. This was scraping new. He was weak as a kitten, which made him hate himself, and he set his teeth against it. Melisandre was there. She looked like a woman who had been crying for days and had forgotten to stop. He did not like to think that she might be the sort of woman who remembers to start. "Welcome back," she said. "Do not leave without telling me next time." "It is rude." "Rude," Jon croaked. Val came behind her and laid a hand on his brow and snort. "Addition, you sleep like a man who thinks sleep will pay a debt," she said, which would have made him smile if he had been a man other than the man he was being just then. "The girls stand watch. They do not let men look like wolves." She meant Ghost, and Jon did not know whether to laugh or sleep again. He did the second. When he could walk, he learned to walk again. The winter air broke him open and cleared him and broke him open again with each breath until his lungs were new. Ghost went with him, and they went very slowly, and he would have laughed if laughing had not hurt. He went to the yard at last and saw the Ghost's eyes standing in a line with their horses behind them like a low, shaggy wall. "Lord Snow," Brenna said, "we kept trouble from your door." "You did," he said. "You'll do it again." He looked at them and felt something expand in his chest that was not pain. "We called you Ghost's Eyes as a joke," he said. "We'll keep the name because it is true. You've made it true." He made a thing then, a little ceremony that was worth nothing and meant everything. He took wool rope and cut lengths of it and dipped the ends in soot and then in seawater brought from Eastwatch and then in melted snow, and he tied them around the wrists of each woman, just a loop, a mark that could be cut at a moment if need be. He said words that were not vows but were a shape of allegiance, something a person could step into and then out of again if their life needed it. He did not ask them to swear to the watch. He asked them to swear to each other. They did. From there, winter deepened the way a knife goes deeper by the man pressing it, not knowing what he does and only knowing he cannot stop. The trees groaned under loads of white and cracked. The sky came down and stayed. Men's noses froze and their ears turned black and fell off without men knowing. The Ghost's eyes rode in it. Brenna and Runa and Skya and Erna and Halla and Nella and the others whose names pinned in Jon's mind like knots. They went to hamlets and brought wood and dried meat and stubbornness. They brought news and then they became news. Old women in the gift began to tell children stories of white wolves who ran before women on shaggy horses whose eyes were sharp as the crack in ice, who came when the snow stood high as a fence and the door would not open, who left a stack of wood and a bag of black glass arrowheads and a soft laugh. The others came without showing themselves, as they do, by their world overlaying the world, by all colors going thin, by the sound of silence sounding like a sound one had not yet heard. The whites came so often that the smell of burned hair and blood and char became a smell that said safety, comfort, normal. The ghosts' eyes became needle-quick at lighting fires in snow, so they did not go out, at finding the places where the wood was too wet and the ice was old. They trapped the dead sometimes. Pits lined with dragon glass shards, cleverly made under soft snow, and they took a cold satisfaction in those, because cleverness is a comfort you can carry when strength fails. On a day when the world was so still that the snow smokers rose straight up from chimneys and made little motionless pillars, Skaya rode north with 2 girls and came upon a stand of dead spruce grown so close together they were like an old man's ribcage. "Here," she said, and did not know why she said it. She dismounted and walked between the trees, and there in the dimness she saw a place where the snow was darker and yet glowed from within, as if a thin blue light lived under it and did not turn the surface the color of the light. The hair rose on her neck, and she would have gone away then, if not for Brenna stepping past her with a bow half lifted and an arrow turned notched, not in the way a man might notch, but in the way a woman who had napped the head herself might lay it there. They stood together and felt the shape of something under their feet, some ring of old stones or the base of a tree long dead and frozen. Brenna drew breath, and the breath went out in a long white stream that did not break like breath should break, and then she loosed. The arrow flew and the light under the snow flinched as if struck by cold, and the sound that came was like the crack of a lake in deep frost, deep, long singing, and a shape rose, a man-shaped thing with skin like milk and hair like hoarfrost and eyes so blue Brenna wanted to swallow the color to make her mouth forget it. It wore armor that looked like it had been grown of sugar and ice both, shifting as if it breathed when it did not. It lifted an arm, and the blade it held was not a blade but a line in the air where the world refused to be in the same way it had been a moment before. Runa threw another arrow. It struck and shattered, and the pieces fell singing, little cries of glass. Erna stepped up, and the sound of her breath was the only warm thing here. The thing looked at them the way a man might look at animals he did not hate and did not respect and did not think of twice. It moved. The arrow went and it hit the thing in the hollow where a man's throat might be, and it shattered inside it, and for a second the world decided to be the kind of world where that meant something. The light in the thing's eyes brightened, or dimmed, or changed, and frost rolled out from it like breath. Then it was gone, not in a moving but in the way flame goes when pinched, here and not. They stood there a long time, listening with everything they had. The light under the snow had gone. When they came back to Castle Black, Brenna did not boast. Runa did. Erna said nothing and sat in the stables with her hands under a horse's jaw, letting the warm breath run over her fingers, as if she were teaching them the lesson of blood all over again. Skaya went to Jon and said, "They can be killed by glass if the world lets it, but sometimes the world does not let it." "Sometimes," Jon said. He took the arrow that Brenna had not loosed and held it a moment and thought of Sam in the snow with fear on his face and a little flame alive and an obsidian dagger buried in something that had not believed in knives. This time it let it. "You will tell the Queen's men," Skaya said. "They like a victory. It will make them stop looking at us like our hips are an affront." "I will tell them," Jon said. "And I will tell them you did not run." "We did not," Skaya said, a little insulted. "We were women. We stood. Hardhome remained out there like a wound one cannot see but feels when weather shifts. Men sent by Eastwatch returned with stories and with eyes that never stopped sweeping corners. Others did not return at all." Jon dreamed sometimes of a shore of black rocks like teeth and a sound like many mouths chewing nothing, and he woke with the taste of salt and iron and ash in his mouth and ghosts' weight across his legs like a blanket he had consented to. He wrote letters he did not send. He sent men he did not want to send, and they waved and went, and he watched their backs growing small. The ghost's eyes could not go across the water. He thought about building sleighs that became boats when they reached ice and then laughed because he had no wood, no skill, and anyway it would not help. Alice Karstark sent a raven one morning with letters written in a hand that looked like a patient woman who knows how to sew and has no thread to waste. She wrote that she and Sigorn had taken Carhold with little blood and a great deal of shouting, and that the old halls remembered laughter when women led. She wrote that the ice on the river broke and mended and broke again. She wrote that she had heard of the ghost's eyes, and that girls in the shadow of her walls asked to learn the whistle. She sent 2 girls with the raven, in truth, wrapped warm, slight as bows, eyes fierce. Jon took them in, and Brenna taught one and Skya taught the other, and Jon watched the north teach itself to be the thing it was meant to be all along. They set traps for the dead in an old field where stone rose like old men's shoulders out of the snow. They scented them with grease and meat and the memory of men by rubbing a glove on a branch and tying the branch above the pit. They put dragonglass where a man would put stakes. They lured, and the dead came, and they fell, and the glass did its hateful, beloved work. Runa laughed afterward and put a black shard under her tongue and claimed she felt her own teeth grow sharper. Erna told her not to be an idiot, not because it was untrue, but because it was dangerous to tell the truth to the air in case it told it back. One day the ghost's eyes did not return when they should have. The day had the feeling of a scab torn off a wound and left bare to the wind. Jon walked the wall walk and watched the white beyond be white, and did not count the time as he counted ghosts' breaths in the night. He had learned that trick and did not want to become that man again. He watched the eastern sky, the west, the north. Tormund stood next to him and said nothing, which was how Jon knew the worry was a great one. Even the ravens grew tired of calling his name and sat sullen on their perches and refused the sun. At dusk, horns sounded from the trees. Not the old call, not too quick and one long, but a note the ghost's eyes had made themselves. The sound of wind slipping around a house that had been built with care. Men in the yard froze and lifted heads like deer hearing snow slide from a branch. Jon did not know he had been holding his breath until the horn let him let it out. He went down as fast as a man with a healing wound can move. The gate opened. The riders came in, not many, for ragged with snow like salt, and 3 garrons with ropes trailing behind them tied to sledges. On the sledges were children, so many that Jon wanted to count and could not. A woman lay on one sledge without moving, and her face was the color of death, and when he put his hand to her throat, he found a little flutter there, and he had to look away and tell himself not to break like glass. Brenna slid from her saddle and nearly fell, and then stood again like a tree breathes and roots deeper. "The lake," she said, and her voice was wrecked. "Thin place. The dead walked under the ice, Lord Snow. They walked under and pressed their hands up and pushed, and the ice went white with their hands. The children ran, and we made them not look down, and we told them it was a game, and it was. We won. We cut holes in the ice, and we drove them toward them with their own hunger, and when they fell through they were slow and we were not. But there were many. Nilla fell." She turned her eyes to Runa, and Runa, who usually had a joke or a curse, shook her head once very slowly, as if she were nodding in reverse. "She did," Runa said. "She fell because she shoved a boy over the water and the water took her instead. That's a trade the gods would make every day, if they were honest and decent and cared to bargain." Jon had known Nella as a girl who had 2 smiles, one quick and sharp, one slower and soft, and who let the slower one out when she saw a horse chewing cud. He went to the slope by the barracks and stood there and did not speak, and felt the wind tell him what it always told him, that the world went on and did not ask permission of the men who think it theirs. He went to the children then and smiled a smile like a man. O's face has been taught to make a line that could be a smile. He said the wrong things, which were the only things the world gives you to say when there is no right thing. That night in the shield hall they burned Nella. They burned her like a king's pyre, though she had been nothing but a girl who had become something the world could not do without and then could because it had to. The ghost's eyes stood and did not weep where men could see them. The men of the watch watched them learn that lesson as if they were watching themselves when they loved the watch first. The queen's men prayed loudly and with beads and piece of polished wood. Melisandre stood back and listened and afterward said, "I saw her in the flames and she laughed. She laughed not to taunt me, but because she had found warmth a man cannot give her. She will not be dead in the way men learn to be dead." "I don't need your stories," Runa said evenly. Melisandre nodded, unoffended, as if the rejection were a thing she had expected and perhaps wanted, for the knowledge it contained. By then, the ghost's eyes were a rumor in the north you could put your hand to. Men rode with them sometimes and learned to be slower. Boys watched them and learned to be quieter. Little girls tied rope around their wrists and called it a promise, and the old women told them they were fools and then cut a piece of rope for themselves when the girls were not looking. The Boltons learned new routes because everywhere they rode, the eyes were watching, and their dogs began to howl at odd hours, and a man would wake and say, "What's that?" and a woman would say, "The wind," and the man would say, "It doesn't sound like wind," and the woman would say, "Then it's nothing you can kill, go back to sleep." Jon's wound healed, and he learned to walk at speed again, and then to run when he had to. He did not ride south. He looked south often until looking south became a habit, and he hated habits he did not choose, and he stopped. Winter does not ask and does not wait. He met with Tormund and with the Queen's men and with Bowen Marsh and with Melisandre and with Val and with the weeping, smiling, shivering, laughing mass of humanity that had gathered under the wall's shadow to be taught that the wall is not a house but a knife we place between ourselves and something that wants our breath. He taught. He learned. He counted wood. He counted men. He counted hope. He stopped counting when counting made the numbers more real than the things the numbers were supposed to shape. In spring, that is what they called it when the snow went from white to old and gray and the smell of water began to run under the smell of ice and the sun learned to last past its lessons. The others came closer. Not in numbers like men count numbers, but in a pressure that took the wind out of lungs. In the morn the world was as it ever was, and then a noon could feel suddenly like dusk. And a man would turn and see nothing, and then feel something as if his heart had thrown a stone into a pond and was counting the ripples. They met them once more in a way like a story, and then no story could hold it. East of the wall, not near it, but nearer than Jon would have liked, Brenna and Erna led 5 others to a place where trees had fallen outward in a circle long ago. A wind burst or a curse, and in the center a stone that should have been a weirwood's mother stood, pale and carved with lines time had worried at but could not erase. The air around it made their breath crackle in their noses like fire in dry brush. They dismounted because horses do not stand in such places. The snow took Brenna's footsteps and arranged them in a pattern she did not recognize and did not wish to. They came like no one comes, with no sound and then all the sound. They came with cold so deep it cleaned the wind of its smell. They had their lines as blades in their hands, and their eyes were stars that had been ground down into a powder and pressed back into eyes. They were beautiful as a storm, and wrong as one when it falls in summer and kills cattle by thinking about it. They moved, and the world moved to let them. The ghost's eyes did not give ground. If they had turned to run, they would not have been fast enough. If they had stood, they would have been not enough. They did something else. Erna lifted her horn and blew a note that had never been written on any map but lives in a place where maps are stones with old stories on them. The horn call did not say come or go. It said remember. The others, if you could say a thing like that about them, paused and echo perhaps. Brenna took the arrow with the head she had napped while thinking of the letter and said it. The world did not wish for this arrow to mean anything. Brenna did not care what the world wished. She loosed. She missed. Runa laughed, short and sharp, and threw one low at a knee that wasn't a knee, and the head shattered and blue light rolled out and up and was no longer in the shape of a man. Erna lifted her knife and made a line in the air with it like the other's blade. Only a copy, only a defiance. And the other turned its head infinitesimally, and Brenna's third arrow took it in the eye. The sound that came was like ice singing. The creature stepped forward, only one step, only to say that it knew it had been struck, and then was not. The others who had come with it faded. That's the only way to say it, though the word is weak. The air that had been a thing you could drink like poison ceased to flow. The silence became silence again, and so it was less heavy. The stone in the center was only a stone, and the marks on it were only lines made by hands that held knives in old summers. The ghost's eyes looked at each other for a long time without speaking. Then they put their bows on their backs and walked their horses away until the horses stopped making the sounds horses make when they are in a place that is not for them. When they brought news like that, the men of the watch grew quiet, not with fear alone but with the knowledge that the world remained a place where impossible and necessary had learned to sit down together. The Queen's men prayed. Melisandre came to Jon with wine and said, "The fire showed me girls whose faces the flames could not see because the flames had chosen them. I do not know what that means. I do not often not know what things mean." Jon said, "Good, In the end, no song would carry what they did. The ghost's eyes became part of the work. The way stoking the fires and shaving the beef and setting men's broken fingers and writing tally of oats were part of the work. They became unremarkable, which is to say, essential. A thing is truly part of a place when men stop naming it and start depending on it without thought. Girls came to them with their hair braided back and their chins set and left with scars on their hands and a command in their whistles that lent men confidence because it lent them purpose. The wildlings among them taught the northerners tricks that men south of the wall had forgotten if they ever knew them, and were taught in turn the patient, careful, clumsy generosity of houses that do not understand why things cannot be put in rows and counted until they behave. Men stopped looking at them as if they had been invented to trouble men's thoughts. They began to look at them as if they were the ropes that hold a tent up in wind. In the very small hours of mornings that came later, Jon would walk the wall walk and look down and see sometimes a handful of riders ghosting along the tree line, moving like the wind moved, not slower, never slower, and he would feel the shape of what he had made like a bruise he was proud to touch. The world had not become kinder. The dead had not begun to die. The Boltons had not learned to be ashamed, and the bastards wrote letters still in hands like flayed meat. But more children grew to be taller and to learn how to put one foot on the snow and have it hold. More fires were lit and did not go out. More dead were burned with the dignity of a fire that is not a god but is instead a hand men pass to each other in the night. One day Val stood with him and looked out and said, "They ride the way a song rides a man's heart. They ride the way a man rides a horse when he knows the horse is wiser than he is," Jon said. She smiled sideways. "Spearwives and girls," she said. "Not men. Do you mind?" "I mind that I did not do it sooner," Jon said. "Good," Val said. She drew her hood up and went to see to a child who had been born 2 hours ago and cried when one told her it was cold as if she were insulted. In the last light of a day when the snow had the color of pearls ground in milk, the ghost's eyes assembled beneath the wall. They sat their garrons with their backs straight and their hands quiet. Brinna lifted her horn and blew the call they had made their own. The sound of wind slipping safe around a strong house, and the sound ran along the wall and into men's ears and out again and into the night. Ghost stood beside Jon and lifted his head and howled then, a long, low sound that made the air ache. It was the kind of howl wolves make when their world fits for a moment. The women rode out. Their rope loops were black on their wrists. Their bows were strung. Their arrows were heavy with glass. Their laughs were few and real. They went into the forest and were taken by it and knew how to take in return. Jon watched until they were part of the world again, and then he turned away and went down into the work, which was the same work as ever, to see that fires did not die, to see that men did not, to see that the wall was still a knife and not a tombstone, to keep winter from being everything, to keep men being men. He knew that the ghost's eyes were out beyond what the eye could see, what the mind could hold, and that their work would not be done in his lifetime. He knew that winter had not ended and would not end. He knew that within that, there were choices and that this had been one. In the night, sometimes he would wake to a sound like a horn or a wolf or a woman laughing into the teeth of the wind, and he would smile without meaning to, and listen, the way a man listens to a fire when he has set it right and knows that he can sleep and someone else will throw the next log when it is time. The snow would fall and would be beautiful because it fell on those who watched, and men would rise and go about the day and say, "It is cold," and then set their shoulders and get on with it. And the girls on their shaggy horses would bring the world back to him, piece by piece, night by night, as if the forest were a map drawn in white and their hoofprints were ink that made a promise out of fear.